Good day, team. Coach Chad here. Today, I'm going to answer some of the questions that we got through the Quantum Leap Progress Tracker form. So, some of the questions that you guys submitted. Now, I'm going to try and be as to the point as possible, not to make this video too long, but be as thorough as I need to answer the questions appropriately. Okay. So, I'm going to dive right into it, guys. The very first question we got is, when are check-in days? And to be honest, guys, there is no correct check-in day, but what we've set up as the check-in day is Friday. Okay, so you check in on Friday. That's because when we did our first measurements. But again, you guys could choose your check-in day to be whenever you want. What actually happens in the back end is that the coaches are constantly checking they check in once a week into your questions and looking at your data and all that kind of stuff. So they usually check in on sometime between Saturday and Monday. So whenever you get it, if you check in on Monday, they might just be a little bit late in checking in and gathering the information that you have put in there. If you put your information in on Friday, it might just be a little bit quicker. Now, I was hoping to have this video out a little bit sooner as well, but our kids' schools were all canceled because of some COVID stuff and a water main break. So I've been playing dad for the last few days here, which has taken up a lot of my time. So either way, the basic idea for the check-ins is you can check in whenever you want, whenever it works for you. It doesn't really matter as long as once in those 7 days in the week that you get all your information in, that's all we require. Okay. But if we have a formal check-in day, Friday. Okay. Next question was, how do you study this material? And this is a very good question. When you go through your manuals that you're getting them in a bunch of different emails. My recommendation to you would be to print off these manuals and have them as something that you're putting together across the 6-month period. And when you're studying this material, one of the greatest methods of learning and soaking in information is repetition of said material. So either reading, doing your tasks, or whatever it might be. Now, the mindset component's a bit different than the nutritional component. Some of the nutritional components, when you go through it, it's just simply do the task, be aware of it. That's part of the process. Okay. So as example would be looking at your 6-month schedule and kind of picking out when are going to be some trouble areas for you so that you can start planning ahead. That's just a task. You have to do it. It's just made sure that you're actually aware of those tasks and that you're setting yourself up for success. The mindset stuff, on the other hand, is quite a bit different. The mindset stuff is meant to be reread, done over and over again on a nearly daily basis. Now, I know for a lot of people, they're going to see that seems like a crazy request, but when we do most of our personal development stuff, it is done on a routine basis over and over, because it's the repetition of the thoughts, the repetition of the ideas, and the repetition of the conscious kind of energy that you're putting towards whatever it is your goal might be. That's so powerful. Okay. So repetition of an idea is incredibly important. So you want to study that stuff over and over. And every time you read or listen to a video that I put out regarding imagination belief, you're going to learn something different. And I think this is a great way to put it. Think about yourself listening to the video. You could even be this one right here. You're on this level of vibration, if you want to call it that. And there's multiple levels of vibration. There's multiple levels of awareness, if you want to kind of look at it in that manner. But what happens when you're paying attention to a video or a movie or whatever you're doing, you're here. You're listening to what I'm saying. You're very aware. And all of a sudden, an idea comes in your head and you jump up here. And now you're off. And whatever I'm still talking about down here, you're now not paying attention to. And then you drop back in and you jump back out. And this is for all of us. We all do this when we're listening to either music, audio, whatever it might be. Okay. So what we recommend you do is you continue to put this on play, put it in on your phone, listen to it while you're driving, spend an hour a day taking some time to listen to this information, to read it. And when you go into like your goals and your wants manifesto and all that kind of stuff, that stuff that doesn't just simply, you don't just write out once. It's something you have to come back to repeatedly, because when you're out in society and you're out in public and doing whatever you're doing, you're constantly having these little thoughts come into play that are adding or changing or expanding upon your current belief system, or the way you view things, or what you truly want to create, or what you want to achieve. And as you're doing that, you have to keep going back and rewriting and rewording and redoing the information that you did. So I hope that helps, but it does take a lot of repetition with regard to the mindset stuff to have it completely sink in, because it's about impressing an idea upon the subconscious mind repeatedly. And by impressing that idea onto the subconscious mind, eventually that's how you create habits, or how you break down paradigms, which we're coming to later. Okay. All right. So off that topic, we're now moving into some nutritional stuff. The next questions that came in were on protein. So I have 3 or 4 questions on protein. So the first one was, what are the whole food sources of protein? Now that's actually coming out in your information for nutrition this week as well. But your whole food sources of protein, I've always looked at it this way. Protein should be something that came from or from something that flew, ran, or swam at some point. Those are going to be your whole food protein sources. So you're thinking again, chicken, fishes, beef, wild game, venison, whatever you want to call it. All of those are going to be your whole food protein sources. But don't misunderstand me from the standpoint of the fact that like tofu and tempeh and all these other kind of variations, chickpeas, lentils, peas, all of these are also still protein sources that you add into your protein counts. So it depends on what kind of dietary approach you take. As an example, a lot of people that are vegetarian are obviously not going to be using the ran, swam, or flew, or the classic idea of the sole and face protein. They're going to be getting it from plant sources. So plant source proteins are still considered proteins. They're not considered a full amino acid profile for most of them, but they're still considered protein sources that are considered whole food protein sources. So you're allowed to count those towards all of your protein ingestion, of course, and considered your whole food protein sources as well. Okay. Now, past that, then the next question kind of piggyback off that was, how much of my daily protein can come from alternative sources of protein? Now, what I assume this question meant, and it's a good question, is things like protein bars and protein powders and other substitute things that are inside of foods and things like that. Now, my classic rule has always been for this, that supplementary protein or additional protein sources beyond whole foods should only make up about 20 to 25% of your total protein ingestion. So if your recommended number is 100 grams of protein per day, you only want 20 to 25 of that coming from a protein powder or bar or substitute of some sort. Okay. Now, for a lot of you guys, that might be a bit of a challenge to get that in. I know some people were struggling with getting their protein counts up to where they need them to be. And I always do recommend protein powder as a cheap and easy and a very effective high leucine dose of protein. So you can usually use that as a snack throughout the day and then as a post-workout supplementation add-on. And that would be where you would get your additional protein source from. But the rest of your meal should be made up of those ran, flew, or swam, or sole and face proteins, or alternative proteins through your whole food choices of chickpeas and lentils and all those kinds of things. Okay, so I hope that answers your question there. The next one is then going to get into how do I get more protein into my diet? Now, the first and easiest answer is it's difficult, but you just have to do it. You have to find ways of doing it. Okay. So you've got to make that your priority when meal planning is you prioritize around the protein. So there's 2 ways you can do that. First is when you're doing your meal planning or you're prepping for the week of what you're going to be cooking and eating, you take out all that meat in advance. Because of course it's always an issue if you don't have thawed or ready meat to cook in your possession. So I recommend taking it out and planning your week out in advance. So that way, you know, the protein that you're going to be ingesting. The other one would be then kind of linked to that is batch cooking protein. This is another one that we do in our household all the time. If I'm going to cook chicken breasts and bake them in the oven or whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to do 2 packages of them, right? We have 6 mouths to feed and we got lots of people eating protein in our household. So we do a lot of protein at one time. So within my fridge at any one point in time, as an example right now, I think I have probably about 5 pounds of pike in the fridge cooked. I have probably maybe 6 moose and pork hamburgers that we created. I also have some sausages that I've cooked up from venison, and we traditionally will have some form of liver or something in the fridge as well. So we have multiple sources of protein available at any time that then I can make different things with. I can make sandwiches, I can make stir fries, I can make a topping or just a vegetable meat dish, whatever I might want that day. I can incorporate that. So batch cooking is going to be very important to getting your protein counts in. It just makes the meal creations a lot easier for you. So I highly recommend you do that. The next thing would be then trying to find more useful useful ways of cooking protein would be to go to Pinterest or go online. Honestly, a lot of people ask for recipes, and I'm not big a fan of handing out recipes, even though they can be really useful. And the only reason is that we have this wonderful thing, the internet and Google and Pinterest. Simply type in beef recipes, venison recipes, and you will have unlimited variations of. I have an app on my phone called All Recipes. It's a place where people just kind of co-op and put recipes in. You can download something like that for free, I believe. And it's a great place just to get ideas and play around with different ways of cooking your proteins. So that would be a good starting place. The next one would be to find foods that also incorporate more protein into them. So an example is you can find yogurts and cheeses with a higher protein count. So rather than the classic yogurt that you'll buy at the store that's very filled with sugar, buy natural Greek yogurts, which are very high in protein. Some cheeses are high in protein than others. Those are both two dairy examples. Another one would be, and even though this does fall into the protein powder and alternatives section a little bit, but one of my favorites, which I have on hand all the time, is Kodiak cakes or power cakes, which are pancakes from Costco. They're a high protein pancake cake. You can buy these at any store. You just, the Kodiak brand is out of Costco, but you can buy high protein pancakes in pretty much any grocery store. And what I do in my diet is I usually have anywhere between 20 and 30 pancakes on the go at any time. I batch cook them. I have them all done. They last about 5 to 7 days, and I just put them in Tupperware, and I know my serving size for each one, and I'm able to pull those out on the go. And it's the fastest and easiest. I have a low-cal syrup that I'll put them on, or I have a peanut butter, natural peanut butter that I'll place on top. So there's some ways that you can make those interesting. I've done them as roll-ups with meat and cheese inside, all kinds of things. You can do a lot with them. You can treat them as a true pancake, or you can treat them as a crepe. You can treat them as a bit of a sandwich. There's lots of stuff you can do with them. So these are just ways that you will have to figure out in your own personal habits as to how you can incorporate that in best. All right. Next one was going to be is, how do I measure my protein, raw or cooked? And this is always a question that comes up. It's a great question. When you look at the package of protein and you use your scan function on MyFitnessPal, you are going to be getting a raw reading of the protein. So you're welcome to take, if you have the nutritional label on the protein, to use that as the measurement, but you have to realize water content and some of the breakdown of protein in the cooking process is going to change a little bit. What I traditionally do though is I do measurements on cooked protein, and then that way I'm always consistent. So it doesn't really matter if you do the raw or the cooked. It just matters that if you're consistent with your measurements, and I hope that makes sense, because as an example, if I always eat my 4 pancakes as an example, and they're slightly bigger from one week to the next, but they're variations of, I'll get an average across, which is what I'm looking for. Okay, so if you always cook your meat and measure it that way, then you'll always be consistent with regard to your measurements. So even if your total caloric content that you're recording is 2,500, but it's actually 2,700, but you're always doing that, it kind of doesn't really matter, because then we'll adjust your calories according to what your weight gain or loss is relative to how you do things. So this is more so a point around consistency and measurement, is that you're always consistent with your measurement process. Okay. From the protein sources, I think that's actually all the questions that came in. So those are great questions, guys. Thank you. Next one, it was a very pointed one, but I think this is actually, it was a good awareness maybe, or something to bring up, that when doing your measurements, not to wear compression clothing. And this actually came up with one of the participants when they came to the initial assessment, was wearing a very, very tight compression gear, and that affected our measurements. When they went home and did them, I'm assuming naked, that the measurements were different. And that's something that I would have overlooked when I did this, because it was myself that did it. And so what you want to do with that is just, again, make sure you have consistency in your measuring plan. So either you wear your compression shorts all the time, or you don't. I'd prefer you don't. And then what you do is you adjust in your progress tracker. You can go back and adjust your first week's measurements that were completed in the compression to your second week measurements. And that way, then the rest of the measurements will have something to come off of that's more natural. So for that individual, adjust your first week measurements to your nude measurements rather than your compression geared measurements. Next one, this was a great one. What do I do when I'm sick? How do I eat when I'm sick? And I can't just, I don't have a lot of hunger, and I'm having a hard time not necessarily keeping food down, but putting food down. You're just your hunger is suppressed. And the thing that has to be understood about when you're sick, you probably aren't moving as much as you normally would. So your activity level is going to be a little bit lower, which means your caloric needs are a little bit lower. But we're only talking a tiny degree. And that kind of depends on how much you actually affected and how much your daily activities are changed, whether you're going to the gym or not, all those different things. But what happens though, when you can't get food is you create a nutrient and a macronutrient, so a micro and a macronutrient debt. And when you create a micronutrient or macronutrient debt, you no longer have the tools available to you to recover properly and to have a strong immune system. So there's a couple things that we can do with regard to sickness. The first one would be is to keep your fluids up, which we all know you want to maintain your fluid counts. But one of the good ways to do that is actually supplement now, and we disregard our 20 to 25% rule for the protein counts, but supplement with things like essential amino acids or branch chain amino acids, BCAAs or BCAAs. You can use them, which will also increase your hydration count because you're going to mix them with water, and it brings in some protein for the day. So it's a lot easier to keep your protein counts up while you're sick. And then the other thing I personally like to do, I don't know if there's a lot of research on this, but is to load up on things like multivitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D. I mean, obviously being within the realm of reasonable levels. So I would take an extra dose of multivitamins when I'm sick. I take a slightly increased vitamin D count. I'll take up to about 5 to 10,000 IUs a day when I'm feeling sickness come on. And then vitamin C really has no saturation level or overdose level, so you can take as much as you want. But I've always found vitamin C to be helpful. And you can start going down a track of multiple nutrients that can be aided towards sickness. I've always kind of put those three at the top of my list, and the multivitamin being maybe most important because I get all the other stuff inside of it. So then I kind of make sure that because I'm going to be taking in less food and because I'm going to be less secure with my nutrient count, then the multivitamin can somewhat help out in that situation. Okay. And then really at the end of the day, you just have to try your best. You really have to try your best to stay on track and remember what your goals are. So that's why you bring your mindset components to it, where what are the goals? What do you have to achieve? Try and stick that on. What ends up happening to a lot of people when they're sick is they really crave crappy food. They crave sugar. They crave hyper palatable foods. So think like fries, McDonald's, all those kinds of things. And again, you're welcome to put them into your diet. You're going to be at a nutrient debt, okay? But you should track them and keep tracking them because you can still lose weight while doing different hyperpalatable foods, but you're going to find that you're not going to be as satiated. But because for most people when they're sick, they don't have the hunger, there might be a way to get around. So you have some ability to put in some more hyperpalatable foods or slightly higher caloric load foods just to make sure that you're getting your nutrients in at the same time. Okay. So that's a brief overview on how to eat when you're sick. Okay. And then for questions, that was kind of it for that right there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put another video together with some MyFitnessPal tips, which are linked to some of the questions that came in. But for now, I'll leave it there. And that is the end of Q&A for this week. Thanks, team.